what I'd like to do now is ask a bunch of you, so any one of you will be called on here, to say very, very briefly, because we've been reading Dickinsonian, the inheritors or people influenced by the Dickinsonian mode. And I want to go back and just ask some of you or all of you to say in a sentence, a very brief point, what aspect of Dickinson's influence or the Dickinsonian mode to you becomes most important as you engage with later poetry. And Kate, I want to give you the floor a little longer as our guest than the others to talk about Dickinson's own influence on you. And if you want to throw Ray Armantrout in there as well, that would be cool. Either Armantrout as a Dickinsonian poet or Armantrout as somebody whose poetry you respect. Okay, so you don't know I'm going to call on you, so here goes. Kamara, what Dickinsonian aspect is worth stressing, important to you?
Well, I did know you were going to call me out, but surprise.
You can pass if you want to wait.
No. The most is hard, but one thing I think is what I've always appreciated about Dickinson or Dickinsonian mode is that I feel as if there is there's always a relationship with the reader that involves, working together towards many different meanings or something from the poem together. And I think that going into this, I feel every time reading some of these poems in this Dickinsonian mode that like I have to bring myself here. I have to bring my whole body and my whole mind, and I am oftentimes excited to do that. So
that's great. It's what Anna Safford, when Anna Strong, 8 years ago when we made these videos, kept calling doing the work. We should come halfway toward what the poet is doing, right? And in the context of Niedecker, it's poet's work. We are basically doing poet's work, because the trade that we're learning is the trade of being heard, or of having, or making it possible for Niedecker to be heard, and creating that intersubjectivity. Okay, so yeah, Erica, the Dickinsonian, briefly, what lingers in either in your own writing as a poet or your work as a teacher?
I think punctuation and word choice, and how even if on the surface a poem doesn't seem to be particularly formally experimental, like Dickinson's attention to language and the way she uses dashes are just really interesting and really important to me.
Great. Thank you. It's a good suggestion for people who are rereading Dickinson or these Dickinsonian poems. Okay, Davy, Allie, and then Kate has a extended floor to talk about this whole issue for her. Davy?
Something that lingers with me and matters to me about what we get from Dickinson is the way that Dickinson's poetry challenges a neurotypical or neuronormative idea of the process of cognition as it becomes language, the process of translating thought into language and translating experience into language, that we're presented often with the idea that there is one way that human brains work, and language follows a neurotypical mode of using the brain. And Dickinson offers us a really complex and useful example of the fact that that's just not true. And I think that's really important.
Yeah, it really is. I think I'm with you. That's the one thing about Dickinson that sticks with me so much. Poems are about cognition in a way, they're about how we know, and how if we know, quote unquote, eccentrically, we might actually know more rather than less. Allie, and then Kate.
This is kind of more literally surface, but just looking at Grandfather Advised Me and the notion of the condensery, I really appreciate the self-contained aspect of the Dickinsonian mode as someone who sometimes is just overwhelmed by like long, sprawling poems. I find the kind of short nugget that nevertheless contains multitudes, just in its depth, to be just really approachable on like a visual level, and being able to just have the feeling of like, oh, like I can dive into this, and it's not going to take me, 40 minutes essentially.
Hey, Allie, when you write fiction, does the Dickinsonian ever creep in? Because, on the surface of it, fiction would be that overwhelming sea of words that you were just saying sometimes gets to you.
Yeah, I was kind of thinking about that while I was thinking about Dickinson appealing to me. I don't know. I would have to think about that more. But I do think there's a certain just clarity of language. And again, as someone said, just word choice. That I'm sure must be in there, and that I'm attracted to in prose writers as well.
Yeah, thank you. I want to turn to Kate. Before we give Kate the floor, I'm just going to ask Anna for the threads, Amber Rose for Facebook, Lily for Twitter, and Gabe for YouTube to collect some, and we'll go around the horn and pick up a new topic. And then I want to make sure we turn to Eve Ewing's poem. So Kate, dying to hear this. I think we may have asked you this before. Sorry if we're repeating ourselves, but what part of the Dickinsonian mode means a lot to you as a writer or as a reader? And you can throw the Armitrap thing in if you want.
Sure. So as a poet, I've worked in both maximalist and minimalist modes. And each has its pleasures and purposes. I especially love spare poems in the Dickinson tradition because, and this goes back to the first question that started off our discussion about meta poems and poems that are about and show the work of their own construction, or construction is the wrong word here, their own creation. So I think of Dickinson and her descendants as writing machines made of words that are like super colliders, where they break the language down into its smallest components and then put them back together in a way that makes every little piece of it resonate and hum and have to work together. So for me as a poet, the pleasure is in, they're almost like puzzles to put together, because every word, every conjunction, every bit of punctuation, every line break, every stanza break, what have you, every bit of syntax and the way that we know syntax works has to be considered and put into motion, as conjoined with every other component of the poem. So it's unfashionable to think of poems as objet or sort of discrete units rather than as a part of a book or a project or, a worldview. But to me, that's what Dickinson did, and her legacy is the poem as a very carefully created kind of blown glass object. And I appreciate reading them that way.
That's great. I had so many thoughts in response to that. I'll just utter one, which is that I think of ModPo itself as so Dickinsonian in that it does treat a poem as a discrete thing, tries to, even though we're always connecting them to movements and making generalizations about them and talking about language theory in relation to them. But ultimately, we talk poem by poem, and I think that's Dickinsonian, actually. Thank you very much.
I just want to say, the way I put all of that sounded very sort of feminizing, like I'm feminizing the tradition or making it ornamental in some way. And that's not what I intend to say. It's more about how no word can hide in a poem like that. And the pleasure in writing a poem like that is knowing that no word can hide, and you have to maximize every part of language in order to really make it work.
I think when you described it as a super collider, we were making no mistake about how crazy, powerful, and radical it all is. Thanks for clarifying that.